How I became involved was pretty direct. They sent me a script. They said there was interest in me playing this character, Agent Ward. I read the script. I will say I remember quite definitely I liked the whole project. Immediately, I didn't know about this Agent Ward character because he seemed quite flat and wasn't so interesting a character to me initially. But I was an admirer of Alan Parker's movies, and also I liked the whole story, the project. So I met Alan, and then he asked me to do it, and I kind of came around. But I will say, I always remember it was a lesson to sometimes follow, not so much looking at the character, but looking at the whole project and looking at the people that you'd be working with, particularly the director. In this case, the role wasn't attractive to me. In the end, it became very attractive to me, in the doing of it. I'm very glad I did it. But as a read, initially, it wasn't that, by it in itself, wasn't that enticing. I knew Gene Hackman was going to do it, and that was a huge plus. I mean, because I always liked him as an actor, and as a young actor, you like to work with good people. It elevates your work and teaches you things, and it is a good sign for the film. And it was a great role for him. So, getting back to what I said about the flatness of the character on the page, you know, I was happy to be a supporting character to him. That was interesting. I think in the making of it, partly because of Alan and just partly because the making of it was very strong, I think that character came alive for me. It's something that I didn't see on the page, but knowing that Gene Hackman was going to play that central character was very important to me. I thought the casting was really good there. Even in the smallest roles, there were some very good actors. When I was a young man, I toured in the Deep South, but I'm from the Midwest, and basically I'm a Northerner, so I didn't know the South so well. So even filming down there, when I filmed Mississippi Burning, the South was an exotic place to me, and a place that I didn't really know. And to even see the relationships, the race relations in that time really helped me understand a lot better the material that we were dealing with. These murders and the civil rights movement in general didn't happen so long ago that on our crew there were people that were related to the residents of the people that had participated on both sides. So we were in the belly of the beast. And I think, of course, that informs what you're doing, and that kind of keeps you on track. It sounds strange given the material, but it was one of the most enjoyable sets ever to be on, because there was a real muscularity to how we worked, and a great efficiency. And that had a lot to do, of course, with Alan, but also with the crew. And I remember very well, you know, Peter Bijou and Mike Roberts. The camera crew was particularly strong. Alan, you know, as I say, it's been a long time, but he was just sweet. You know, he's charismatic in a kind of a peculiar way. But I loved being in his company, and he was very generous with me, and he helped me a lot. And I can honestly say it's been too long, but I have a great affection for him. I remember very well, Gene was a little suspicious of him at one point. Gene is a wonderful actor and a great guy, but he can be a little cranky sometimes. And I remember a couple of times he thought, what does this Englishman know about civil rights in America? There was a little bit of that sense, but I think they ironed that out. When the film came out, I remember some people were sort of upset about this fictional telling of an actual event. But in the end, I think it brought more people to learn more about the case and reminded them about a period that, you know, some historic events that, like any painful part of your history, you tend to forget about. I mean, you could argue it both ways. I only, you know, you try to be responsible about what you do, but I felt like what our story was, it was more about what we were focusing on, and it really focuses on the characters. And I liked very much the theme that politics are personal, and sometimes they aren't necessarily based on, you know, a high moral ground. They're kind of practical. And I think one thing that I hadn't known, you know, not being an expert on this case, was something. It's useful to know, for example, that J. Edgar Hoover was not crazy about the civil rights movement, but he was even more concerned about the fact that he couldn't control the Ku Klux Klan. So it's basically, he sent people down there in some respects because it was his way to try to control the Klan, rather than for him to do investigate violation of the law. And I think that's interesting. As a movie that an actor made, I had a wonderful time with it, and I think the movie did have a positive effect, even with some criticism, in the respect that for a lot of people that saw the movie, it brought them to either remember or for the first time understand a situation that went down in 1964 that was the kind of thing that we shouldn't forget. I think it was moving, and I think, no, it's a film that I never like to say I'm proud of something, but I'm very happy I made it.
It was sent to me as a script from Mike Medavoy at Orion Pictures. I was being sent so many screenplays, and suddenly, I suppose it was because it was of a political nature, and it's really hard to do political films or films of some kind of social relevance within that American machine. And so I think I was attracted to it because of that, really, because it was about the civil rights struggle and a detective story, which is what the studio wanted to make. And the two elements together, really, I suppose, is why I thought it would be a good subject. Chris wrote his, I think he'd done like 2 drafts before I became involved. And then I worked with Chris for a few weeks trying to do a new screenplay together. And it's really hard for writers working with somebody like me who is also a writer. And also I think writers kind of never really, they think, oh, they've sold their script to the studio, you know, why does anybody want to change it? But of course, you know, it is an organic process, and particularly this particular subject, because there was so much research and available materials of the period, that the more that I absorbed, the more I wanted it to be other than that screenplay. So we kind of worked together, and not terribly successfully, really, to be honest. It was a frustrating period, I think, for him and me, and so I said I would like to write my screenplay. And they said, as long as you don't take his credit, you can have a go at it. And actually, if your screenplay isn't very good, then you might be looking for a new job. But I did rewrite it, and completely, actually, and I made it closer. I politicized it in a way that I wanted to. I politicized it probably too much for the studio, and probably not enough for politicians and journalists. But in the end, it was much closer to the story that I wanted to tell. You immerse yourself in the history, and that's when I realised that I needed to rewrite the screenplay, because the original screenplay by Chris Gerolmo did not have that kind of historical background. They hadn't got into it in that detail. We did when we prepared the film, and then not just researching the period of the civil rights struggle, but me being an outsider, you know, learning about Mississippi and Alabama, and we went everywhere over in tiny little aeroplanes, dangerous aeroplanes, crisscrossed all the southern states really, looking for the locations really. And the more time you spend looking at locations and then you do casting and stuff, you kind of absorb the place and you start to understand the place. And it's something about being an outsider, you kind of look at it very differently to people who are maybe too familiar with it. Orion were pretty clear, they wanted Gene. That was before I even thought about it. They said Gene's perfect for it, and I kind of said absolutely, you know, I mean, how can you disagree? You know, he's one of the great American actors, and it was a privilege to work with him. So I never really said, oh no, I have my own ideas about who it's going to be, because he was perfect. And then Willem was my first choice with regards to playing the other part, Willem Dafoe. And I met with Willem, and you know, I really admire him. He comes from experimental theatre in New York, and so he's the kind of guy who has none of the trappings of, you know, being a movie star and all that stuff, which is actually, for a director, that's kind of important and very refreshing. So the two of them together, they were very different personalities actually working, and as actors they're very different in their techniques, but they kind of fitted the roles perfectly for one another, coming from their very different backgrounds. Well, Gene's one of those actors, you know, first of all, it's pretty intimidating for a director, you know. He's made, I don't know, 60 films or something. So he's always going to know more than you know. He's the kind of actor, I always compared him to like Spencer Tracy, or one of those great actors who, he kind of keeps everything very simple. He doesn't, remember we did a scene once and I said, well then, Gene, perhaps you could come here and you sit there and you pick, and he said, no, I don't pick it up. I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't do props. And it was such a wonderful phrase. He said, by that he meant he didn't overly complicate the scene. He could really pare it down to the real essentials of what a scene is. And therefore it's that much more clear and that much more powerful. On the other hand, he's the kind of actor that you know, if you say we're in a little bit of trouble here with regards to the light on your face, could you just half turn a tiny, and he could always do that. He was an incredibly professional actor, really, and total joy to work with. There is a theory that if you don't get the casting right, then you're not going to get the film right. And I had cast, obviously, Gene and Willem early. They were always there. And then we had such great characters, you know, and we were very lucky in Fran McDormand in that she hadn't really done a great deal at that time, that I was aware of anyway, but she's just a sensational actor. I mean, I know it sounds a bit sort of lovey hyperbole when you talk about people being so wonderful, but she really is, and a joy for any director because she's just so incredibly professional. Brad Dourif has been, you know, ever since I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you know, Milos Forman's a big hero of mine, and so any actor who's worked with Milos is going to be brilliant, and I knew, and he was brilliant, you know. So, yeah, very lucky with that sort of the supporting cast. In the end, you know, they're not ever supporting really, because even they might be smaller parts. If you get those wrong, then they can really mess up the major parts, you know. So because they are, as I say, in the same scenes together. But we're very fortunate. It's a very strong cast. It's interesting that, you know, of all the films that I've done, very rarely do I work with actors twice. And that's not because I don't like them. Sometimes you don't like them. Sometimes you never want to see an actor again at the end of a movie. But it's to do with the fact, I don't know, I always see the actor as in that role, and so I always find it kind of hard to imagine them doing something else, but that's just a thing, sort of wrinkle that I have. But with regards to the film crew, those are the people that I work with film after film after film, because one, they're very good at what they do, and they're my friends. And if you're in the middle of Mississippi living in some horrible holiday inn somewhere or whatever, you want your friends around you. And, you know, I'd worked with Peter Biggio a lot of, not all my films, but he's done a lot of my films. Jerry Hamling, the editor, Bob Colesbury, the producer. They're your bedrock, really. With people like that, it makes it a lot easier for a director to be able to work, and because it's, you know, it's a collaborative art form, and you're only going to be as good as they are. We needed a small town, and the perfect town didn't seem to exist, you know, and to be period correct. And we ended up in kind of 2 locations in Mississippi and in Alabama, but we went to 300 small towns to try and find a town that was just perfect. And of course, you know, when you're looking for something that's in the back of your head, you're never going to find it. And then you adapt it. And so you take the small town Lafayette in Alabama is where we ended up shooting, and I think that it's as much to do with the production design as it is to do with the history of that town, because you put it back to how it was, really. I think that we put a lot of time and attention into recreating the period. I think it's incredibly accurate with regards to everything that you see, in that it's not a documentary, it's a fictional film, obviously, so you know, there's certain liberties that one takes, but I think that you know, it has the feel of the place and the time, and I think that that's really important when you're doing this kind of film. When we first arrived in Mississippi, everybody said, "Oh God, it's going to be so difficult. You know, they're going to shoot you. You know, and there were a couple of crazy people who did suggest that the crew should be shot, but I think that you know, we went in '88, and that's 24 years after it happened, and it was a different Mississippi that we found. You know, and I think that. Every so often you scratch the surface, you'd be in a bar, sometimes we would be talking and then somebody would say to me, "Are you the director of that movie?" And you'd say, "Yeah," and then suddenly you get all of the prejudice come out that actually was part of, you know, all the hatred of 1964. But in the end, we're a big movie, you know, and we bring lots of people down there and we spend lots of money, so the locals really like that. So I have to say that it wasn't very difficult. They were very welcoming to us, but mostly because we were spending a lot of dollars. We did the scene where Gene and all the detectives have been brought in and they had to wade through this horrible stream, and it was pretty nasty, and Gene said to me, you know, "This is the kind of scene you should do on the back lot in the studio, you know, because it was horrible." And there was a real alligator, which everybody was a bit nervous about. So I said, "No, there's never in history has an alligator ever eaten anybody who was a member of the Screen Actors Guild." So I thought we were okay. But the alligator watched us do this filming in this horrible place. And it's all right for us because we're, you know, the camera's on dry land. It's only the actors have to be put through it, but, you know, they have an easy time most of the time. The thing is, you know, most of my generation of filmmakers shoot in the real place, you know. We don't have the luxury of building sets and studios, and you know, in the old Hollywood days, you would build everything on the back lot. But actually, there's something about being in the real place, which is, there is a truth to that, which you can put up there on the screen, and that's a very powerful way to make a movie. And so you're in real places, you're adapting real places to your needs, of course. But sometimes you are, you know, you're filming in very poor areas, sometimes houses where the people are living in poverty, really. And, you know, there's always something phony I always think about us as filmmakers, because you go, "Oh, that looks great." But you go, why is it great? It's great because someone actually living in quite sad circumstances, you know. And we film it because all we care about is the shot. And also, when you arrive in some of these areas where we were filming, very sad areas, and then suddenly this whole army of people, film crew arrive, you know, and you take over these people's lives and places and houses, and there is something disturbing about that, because it isn't real, you know. It's not a documentary, it's a fiction, and we're taking advantage. But the reason we're taking advantage is because it is a way of making it look as truthful and as honest and as real as possible. And it's always a line, I think, between us taking advantage of people and actually just celebrating what's true, what's honest. Well, like all things, you know, film is an illusion, you know, and so the exteriors of a place are not the same as the interiors of a place. I think the interior of the barbershop was in Canton, Mississippi, and the exterior is in Lafayette in Alabama. But I mean, in the end, we have this fantastic army of production designers and art directors and who are forever changing things. But actually, if you find the real place, like an old barbershop that's been there for 50 years, it smells real. And you can't, no production designer in the world could actually recreate that exactly like that. But it makes it that much more difficult because it's harder to shoot in the real location than it is to build the set. Sometimes things have to be built because there's no way that you can actually shoot something. We had enough time to do it properly. we probably had enough money to do it properly, and we put a huge amount of time into preparation. And a lot of credit goes to Bob Colesbury, the producer, because he's so thorough, and he really made our lives easy because, you know, if you get the preparation right for any film, then you're going to get the film right. Orion were wonderful. I mean, because they did have this history, you know, they were the old United Artists group, and their basic theory was the original United Artists philosophy, which Orion adapted, which is that you make the decision on what film you want to make, and you choose the filmmakers, and then you give them the freedom to do it. And you know, there are always the disciplines of budget and making the film that you've agreed at the beginning. But after that, they were wonderful. They were not the kind of studio that second-guessed you every single day. You didn't get a phone call every single minute saying, oh, I've been looking at the dailies and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But you now do, of course, in times 1,000, because that's the kind of film industry that we now have, which is the film industry of the film executive. But when we made Mississippi Burning, it was very much still the days of trusting the filmmakers. Filmmakers as artists should be allowed the freedom to do what they want, and out of that can come good films. In fact, Arthur Krim, who started Orion and United Artists, was very much actively involved with the civil rights struggle and when it happened, and so I think he supported us. Everybody did, really. We never ever thought it was going to be quite the controversial film that eventually, you know, it became. We knew that we would ruffle a few feathers. I thought that we would be completely and utterly supported by the black community, and we weren't, is the truth, because a lot of black politicians were kind of, you know, concerned that our two main protagonists were both white, and, you know, and it was a black civil rights struggle. So had we in some way usurped their history in order to make our movie, you know, and I suppose in some ways we did. And on the other hand, I always said it could never be the definitive film of the civil rights struggle. It was just one film, and there should be 50 films made. And, you know, there were 20 films afterwards were made, but none of those films were ever as successful or as powerful or as relevant as Mississippi Burning. It was made with very single vision, which was supported by a film studio, allowed me that single vision, and it's a film that it was exactly how I wanted it to be and what I thought at that moment in time. It's easier to talk about it now than when the film came out, where I was a bit more nervous about it and a bit more apologetic, probably. I'm not apologetic in the slightest now with regards to the film I made. I'm really proud of it, and it's a very, very strong, powerful film and politically important film, and absolutely rare within the commercial world of the American studio system for a film this strong and this powerful and this political to get made in the first place is amazing, and the fact that we did it as well as we did is something that I think everybody involved should be really very proud of.